street presents itself as a fixed corridor, a controlled environment with no anomalies. Every structure aligns with municipal precision, but the stability is conditional. The geometry is dependent on uninterrupted observation. The moment eyelids close, even for a fraction of a second, the corridor reconfigures. The system waits for the lapse, then adjusts its layout. The street is not shifting randomly. It is responding to the act of blinking, using the interruption to rewrite its spatial configuration. The environment is testing how much change can occur without being directly witnessed. After the first blink, the corridor alters by measurable degrees. The houses drift out of alignment. The asphalt stretches. The mailbox disappears. These are controlled deviations, small enough to be dismissed as memory errors. The system prefers subtlety at this stage. It wants the observer to question their own recall, rather than the environment. The street is calibrating your tolerance for spatial inconsistency. It is determining how much distortion can be introduced before you recognize the pattern. The corridor introduces a new branch. The fork is shallow, almost decorative, but it did not exist previously. The system is escalating. The geometry is no longer adjusting details. It is adding pathways. The street is beginning to divide itself into multiple routes, each one representing a different version of the observer's trajectory. The environment is preparing to fragment into parallel corridors. Each path hums faintly, as if aware of its own direction. The air feels heavier, charged with the tension of duplication. The observer senses that movement now carries consequence. Every step defines which version of the street will continue to exist. The system is learning to replicate choice itself, turning observation into architecture. The divergence becomes more pronounced. The left path curves unnaturally, bending at an angle that defies typical urban planning. The right path maintains its linear trajectory. The system is creating distinct routes, each representing a different potential outcome. The street is no longer a single corridor. It is a branching structure that expands with each interruption in observation. The curve on the left feels intentional, almost performative, as if the environment is demonstrating its ability to distort. The straight path on the right behaves like a control sample, a baseline reality preserved for comparison. Together, they form a test, a measurement of how far the geometry can stretch. Before the observer notices, the corridor is learning to separate possibilities, to split experience into parallel tracks that can be manipulated independently. The geometry begins folding. The left path loops back toward the observer, creating a recursive corridor. The right path splits again, forming a secondary branch. The environment is no longer behaving like a physical street. It is functioning as a dynamic system that reorganizes itself based on the observer's visual interruptions. The street is becoming a self-referential structure. Each loop and split feels deliberate, as if the corridor is testing how many variations it can sustain at once. The recursion on the left suggests the system is beginning to reuse its own spatial data, while the branching on the right shows it is still generating new possibilities. The observer is walking through a feedback loop, a place that remembers its own shape and then folds that memory back into reality. The branches begin defying gravity. Some corridors rise vertically. Others descend at impossible angles. The environment is abandoning physical constraints. The street is transitioning into a multi-axis structure. The system is testing how far it can deviate from known geometry before the observer rejects the environment entirely. Each tilted path feels like a probe, a deliberate push against the limits of perception. The corridor is no longer concerned with realism. It is experimenting with dimensional flexibility, bending space to see whether the observer will follow or hesitate. The branches interconnect, forming a lattice of corridors. The original street is almost gone. The environment is now a network of pathways that shift with each blink. The system is constructing a spatial matrix. The observer is no longer navigating a street. They are navigating a structure that responds to perception. Each connection feels intentional, as if the environment is stitching its corridors together into a single, reactive organism. The lattice flexes subtly, adjusting angles and intersections in real time, testing how much complexity the observer can process before losing their sense of direction. The lattice begins rotating. The movement is slow but deliberate. The environment is no longer passive. It is actively repositioning itself. The system is demonstrating autonomy. The street is now a mechanical structure that adjusts its orientation based on the observer's visual interruptions. Each rotation feels like a recalibration, a quiet shifting of gears beneath the surface. The corridors turn with purpose, aligning and realigning as if searching for the most efficient configuration. The observer is witnessing the moment the environment stops reacting and starts deciding. The lattice separates into two independent structures. Each one represents a different version of the observer's trajectory. The environment is creating parallel corridors. This street is no longer a single entity. It is a bifurcated system that expands with each blink. The split feels intentional, as if the environment is dividing its own memory into separate channels. Each structure drifts with a subtle autonomy, adjusting its angles and pathways without waiting for input. The observer is now positioned between two competing realities, each evolving according to a different interpretation of their presence. A void forms between the two structures. The environment is creating negative space. The system is testing how much absence can exist within the corridor. The street is transitioning into a structure defined by both presence and absence. The emptiness feels intentional, a deliberate removal of geometry meant to measure the observer's tolerance for spatial loss. The void behaves like a new component of this system, a blank field that absorbs detail instead of generating it. The corridor is learning how to use silence, how to shape reality, not just by what appears, but by what disappears. The structures begin collapsing inward. The void expands. The environment is reversing its expansion. The system is preparing to reset. The street is transitioning back toward a single corridor. The collapse feels controlled, almost rehearsed, as if the environment is retracting its experiments and pulling its geometry back into a stable form. Each falling segment folds neatly into the fog, erasing the complexity it once created. The observer can sense the system tightening, consolidating, preparing to rebuild the corridor from whatever remains. The environment reforms into a single corridor. The houses realign. The asphalt stabilizes. The system has completed its cycle. The street resets when blinking stops. The geometry returns to its original configuration. The environment waits for the next interruption. The stillness feels deliberate, as if the corridor is holding its breath, preserving this restored version of itself until perception fractures again. Every detail sits perfectly in place, yet carries the faint tension of something ready to shift the moment the observer looks away. Room 6-7.